Hey guys, what's up? In today's video, I want to talk about the Division beta. I finally got my hands on it and I had the time to play the beta extensively in the last few days. And I thought I'd just share my thoughts with you guys in this video because prior to me getting into the beta, I watched loads of reviews on it. And it got a lot of criticism from many different people. Amongst those were that it's too short, that it's very repetitive, and that the game is downgraded, and there were so many points of criticism. So I thought it just makes sense for me to kind of go into a little bit of my experience. Because based on all that negative feedback that the beta got, or that I saw so far, I went into the game with a rather bad attitude. I mean, I was expecting the big downgrade. I read that it has horrible performance issues, and I was basically expecting a really bad experience, but hey, let's try it anyway, see how it is. And quite the opposite was the case. I really enjoyed the beta, I can tell you that much up front. I think it's a great game, it turned out really well. I didn't have any performance issues. I had to turn everything down to low, but my machine is not very fast, so the gameplay you see in the background is all on low settings. It's not particularly pretty. But let's talk about that. I'm going to go into the positives first and then later speak about the negatives. And I think the overarching thing was the, prior to the beta coming out, downgrade debate. Everyone said, well, the demo we saw at E3 wasn't as pretty last year and all the textures looked smudged, and we just got a lot of criticism. Even I made a video about that because I noticed it as well. Having played the game now myself though, I have to say it is a very pretty game. Like I said, I'm playing it on low settings, but having seen it on high settings on other people's machines, it just looks absolutely great, even on low settings. The lighting is great. I love the snow effect. When you have the snow coming down and it gets close to light sources, it then adopts the light of that. And they carry this visual finesse through into every aspect of their level design, which is amazing. Speaking of the level design itself, the locations that you explore, in my opinion, are just brilliant. It's not, you know, the typical first-person or third-person shooter locations where you're like, oh look, here's a warehouse, go into the warehouse, and it's just a boring location. These are very nice New York themed locations, at least the ones I saw in the beta. One being a basketball stadium which you can explore, and you wander over the court which has been turned into kind of a first aid quarantine zone or something, and then you go deeper into the stadium and up in the stands, and it's just a beautiful location, and it's so much fun to explore it. And then there are other missions that happen in train stations which just look great in terms of like New York underground train stations. So I love the map design, I love the visual finesse of it, and it completely convinced me that the game will look absolutely gorgeous on release. And you know, it didn't, like I said, it didn't have massive performance issues as well. And then all that visual finesse and these exciting locations that you explore translate into a very dense and thick atmosphere as you roam the streets of New York. The sound is great, the world looks amazing, and it just really creates a very tense mood as you explore these locations and this city. Now, another aspect that was criticized a lot in many of the videos that I saw that criticized the beta was the MMO type damage model, meaning that you can't go up to an enemy and give him one headshot and he dies. Every enemy has a health bar and every enemy has a level, kind of like they do it in Borderlands or Destiny, where you just have to shoot down their health bar and then after a while they die. Now, I normally hate that model. I really thought I'm going to be majorly annoyed by it, but having played it now, it actually works quite well. Because if you imagine you could run around with your co-op friends and every headshot would be a kill, you obviously would do headshots all the time. And that means you have to double or triple the amount of enemies for it actually to work, right? Because sometimes you only have 5, 6, 7 enemies, but because they take so much damage, it actually works. You know, it is still a bit challenging. Also, I noticed that it adds quite a few tactical elements to the gameplay, because sometimes you have enemies that just take a bit more damage than your average enemy, and that then requires a little bit of communication with you and your co-op partner, and you're like, you know, you shoot him, he's going to go towards you. When he's halfway, I'm going to shoot him, he's going to come back, and we're going to kill him kind of from both sides. So it actually added tactical elements to the game, which I enjoyed, and it didn't bother me too much. It was actually quite fun to shoot down these health bars of the enemies. So also there, no real criticism. Now, a lot of people also said the gameplay is very repetitive, right? And it's true, it is very repetitive, but I have to say it is a lot of fun. It's a little bit like we've seen it in Destiny, right? Where a lot of people are like, yeah, but it's always the same gameplay. Yes, but the mechanic of the gameplay works so well that it is a lot of fun. Now, I don't know if it's going to be fun to play this game, let's say 200 hours, okay? Then they definitely need other incentives to keep you going and keep you engaged. But as far as the beta is concerned, it was just so much fun, and I replayed the story missions. The mechanics just work. Modding your guns is a lot of fun, you know, creating different attachments, looting items, attaching them to your guns, and then just the actual activity of grinding down enemies was a lot of fun and felt very rewarding. On that, it is generally a very grindy game, if that makes sense. If you want to level up, you need to basically repeat the story missions on harder difficulties. For me, that is not that much fun. I did it, but after you've done a mission 2 or 3 times, you know, it is just always the same thing. It is challenging, and you know, you can approach the mission in different ways, but it is still always the same mission, and it kind of rips you out of this whole New York in the state of an emergency narrative, if that makes sense. If you do the same thing again and again, and there would have been so much easier ways of doing that, right? Like, for instance, let's stick with this example of the basketball stadium, right? You go in, you do the mission once. Later on, you come back, you enter through the exact same spot, the enemies are coming from the exact same angle, and you're doing the same thing. Why don't they take these locations and build a bit of a story around it? So, for instance, you know, you take over the basketball stadium, and then 1 hour later, you get a phone call, and they're like, look, man, there are bandits again in the basketball stadium, and they took over this area. Can you check it out? And this time, they make you enter the building from the other side, basically where you left it before, and the enemies maybe just spawn in different places. And instead of running down the same path as you did before, you this time run it backwards, and you design the location so that you can maybe have 2 or 3 different ways how you approach the location, and that would have just made it so much more interesting in the long run, and it would still save you all the effort of creating like endless new locations that you have to model up. It's a bit like in a racing game when you race a track forward, but then you can also race it backwards, right? It suddenly becomes a completely new track, even it still is the same model, if that makes sense. So to me, that is a little bit of a shame that you kind of replay all these missions, and it does get quite repetitive after a while. Nonetheless, because you're with your friends, it is a lot of fun, and it's still in my plus points. You know, I really wouldn't list it as a negative point. It's just a small thing I want to mention. Just on the technical side, I didn't experience many glitches. Everything worked really well, including the, you know, setting up co-op lobbies and all that. Sometimes, especially with Uplay, there were problems in the past, but it worked quite smoothly, so I can't really complain on that side. So that's my list of all the positives, guys, and that's where we're getting to some of the negative thoughts. When I first got into the game and I played the first few missions, I hated the controls, and I'm talking about how it feels to move the mouse, how it feels to aim down sight and just shoot. Everything felt a bit wobbly, it didn't feel very tight. It basically felt a little bit like a half-hearted console port, I have to say that. Even I know Ubisoft has been preaching on and on how they created like a dedicated PC version. But then over time, I have to say, I got used to it, and then it was fine. It was just that initial impression that was a bit bad. And also, there are just some decisions that the developers made on the controls itself that are just a bit weird, and I'm just talking about the PC here. For instance, if you want to throw a grenade, you need to tap G, and then you need to position where you want to throw it, and then you need to confirm that with your mouse button. It's just 3 steps to throw a grenade, and in any other game you just hold your G button, you know, you locate where you want to throw it and let it go, and he chucks it, which is much more intuitive, much more fun. Also, they do little things when you first start the game, like climbing with the control button, which is down somewhere where your pinky finger is, and it just feels very unnatural. Obviously, you can change these things, but I just noticed some of these issues with the controls, and I think they could possibly look a bit into that and see how they can make that a bit more intuitive. I noticed, and that is obviously also due to my machine being a bit slower, that the loading times are rather long. Every time you die and you want to respawn somewhere in a home base, you need to wait, and there's a little bar that goes around and builds up, and it just literally takes like a minute every time until you actually respawn. Now, another friend of mine, he has a quite fast machine. He didn't have that problem, so I think it's a lot due to RAM in your machine. But on the other hand, it really drove me to not wanting to die even more, right? Because you not only spawn half a kilometer away, you need to run to that location again, you also need to wait. So that waiting time really creates a bit more pressure of you not wanting to die, which could possibly interpret it as a good thing, to be honest. It's not necessarily bad. Now, one thing that everyone that I played with noticed, and that quite bugged us, is that there is just not enough loot around. Every player gets their own loot, so you can't steal each other's loot, which is good. And there are loads of different weapons and gear, and you find loads of stuff, but they are just not really spread out in the world. There's just nothing that encourages exploration. As you run to your next mission and you run through these really beautiful streets of New York, I just want to have, a little electronics shop here or something that I just can go inside. I don't have to. There's no mission there, but I can just go in and walk up to the first floor and there's a flat and I can explore it. There's not much of that to be found. If you can explore buildings from the inside, it's always connected either to a side mission or to something that is highlighted on your map. And yeah, I just would have hoped that, maybe you can go to cars and open the trunk and find something in that. I mean, I just played Dying Light, and there they did that really, really well. The whole world is just full with stuff that you can explore, and everywhere you can go you might be lucky and find this one really rare item. So it really encourages exploration, and I feel Ubisoft didn't do that enough in this beta, at least. Also, I found that there are not really enough random encounters. When you walk from one location to another or from one mission to another, you sometimes walk through the streets for like 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes and nothing really happens. There are a few civilians that you can maybe give like a bottle of water. But you would just hope that you walk through the streets and suddenly, boom, there's this massive explosion and it was a trap, right? And you are trapped in the middle of bandits and you gotta fight your way out of it. Or that you encounter crimes a bit more, right? As you walk through these dark back alleys. I mean, it is kind of an apocalyptic version of New York, right? So people would be committing crimes, people would be scavenging more. And that is not really brought to life enough. You get that every now and then, but it is just not really enough, And I want to have more of these really random encounters that could happen any moment and would make the game so much richer. So that's a bit of a shame. It feels like they missed a bit of an opportunity there. But let's see how that goes in the final game when it comes out. The intel that we have at the moment states that there are just a bit over 10 main story missions in the full game. Obviously there are loads of side missions and small things you can do, so that might stretch it, but to me that just doesn't seem like enough. I mean, they do have 2 or 3 main missions in this beta, and if you imagine you have 10 of those and that's the full game, honestly, that is just not enough. I think they need to put more into it. If you would say 20, maybe 25 main missions plus the side quests, that feels like the right amount. But just over 10, it's not been confirmed, it's not a number that's official. That's just what we know at the moment. So it might be actually more than that. We have to wait for the final game. But if it is just 10 or a bit more than that, I can see that will just not be enough. Another thing I noticed is that you encounter all these gangs on the streets or in little side quests that you do, and all the enemies just look the same. It just feels like you're fighting a whole gang of copy and paste hoodie gangsters, right? It's not that one guy has the hoodie down or the other one maybe has a green hoodie or a blue hoodie. I mean, especially in this kind of apocalyptic cityscape, you would expect that people run around and they scavenge and they steal clothes and every person looks slightly different. But it is very obvious that they all look the same. They're all the same model, and that is just a bit of a shame. Later on in the beta, you then encounter different types of enemies, but there was just not really enough diversity in the design of the enemies there. Even they are basically exactly the same enemy, make them all slightly different to just make it feel a bit more authentic, really. Now, when you finish all your story missions, you then get opened up to the Dark Zone. I have to admit, I didn't play the Dark Zone enough. I basically kept playing the story missions with my friends. But what I saw of the Dark Zone, and this is just very, very top-line feedback of what I saw there, it sometimes felt a bit empty. There was not enough happening, and there were not enough AIs around, and especially like tough AIs. it felt great to enter the dark zone. It immediately felt like threatening, and it's kind of like you're entering the wildlands. Anything could happen now. Like, that's really cool. But then you just run around it and you explore, and there are just not enough AIs or enough players around that would make it interesting. Again, that might be a thing that they're going to tweak for the final game. Another thing that I notice is that players just go rogue, which means they kill 1 or 2 enemies, and then you get like a rogue counter, which gives you rewards, and you basically collect bounty. But then what players do is they kill other players, and then they go up on a roof and camp there. And I think that's just not really how the game was designed to be played, and I really hope that Ubisoft notices these issues with the Dark Zone at the moment and tweaks that somehow so that some of these issues are addressed and can't be exploited in the final game. However, generally I think the idea of creating like an open-end game when you finish the story with this Dark Zone is a really good idea, and it feels great. And I'm pretty sure that when they tweak it a little bit and address the issues that really get flagged up now during the beta, then it could be the perfect end game scenario, right? They just have to take cues from games like DayZ and so on to really make it something that you want to keep playing and that you will come back to again and again, and that will just give the game like a legacy beyond the story missions. Now, guys, these are basically my thoughts. So what is my verdict on this beta? I have to say, like I said at the beginning, I had a lot of fun. Much more than I expected. I have to say, I really, really loved the game. It felt much tighter than I thought it would be, and I really can't wait to explore the full game. Would I recommend you to buy the game at full price on launch? Probably not, because there are still a few issues in it that Ubisoft needs to address. Is it a $60 game or a £50 game? If you're really into these kind of games, then maybe yes. And if you're very much into co-op gameplay, then it might be. I personally will not buy it on release. I will wait until it's on a sale, but I would definitely be happy to pay, let's say, £30 for it or £35. It's not a £15 game or something. It is definitely worth its money, and I would definitely recommend you to look into it. Unfortunately, today is the last day of the beta. It's Sunday today, so I'm not sure you can still get your hands on that, but the game will come out, I believe, on the 8th of March, so it is not far in the future. So I hope, guys, that my thoughts helped you a little bit to get clarification on whether the game is for you, what works and what doesn't. If you have any thoughts on the beta, if you played it yourself, please leave your thoughts down in the comment section. What did you like? What did you hate? Where do you think Ubisoft still needs to tweak the game a bit to make it possibly better? What needs to be addressed before the final release on the 8th of March? Leave all your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, you can like it, you can subscribe to the channel, you can share the video, follow me on Twitter, put all the relevant links down in the description. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. I'm out. Bye.